pleasure always to talk to the journalism school and to talk about financial journalism, which I'm very passionate about, as you can imagine. This is our publication. I bought a few, I'll leave them behind. The Financial Mail's been around for 46 years. We are notionally an esteemed publication, but I'll let you be the judge of that. As Kevin said, I'm a bit of a stand-in speaker, so I really just wanted to talk a little bit about my own experience of financial journalism and what I think financial journalism does, and where I think it's different, particularly from journalism of other types. I should announce my prejudice from the start. I think that financial journalism is the most important form of journalism, and everything else pales into insignificance next to it. But really, just over my kind of limited career in journalism, the change in the prominence of financial journalism has just been absolutely immense. When I first joined Business Day, Kevin was what were you, deputy? Probably news editor, that's right. And I'm sure he could tell you some terrible stories about the terrible journalism that I did at that stage. So anyway, the good news is that even if you start badly, you can end up being the editor of the Financial Mail. I started off as a really writing about politics and the economy, which was really the kind of vogue topic when I came out of university. South Africa was still in transition at that point. And I was kind of thrown into financial journalism. I worked for Business Day because it was a respectable title, and a lot of my friends worked there. But I didn't really consider financial journalism very much until I guess I'd been there for about 5 or 6 years. And it suddenly occurred to me that everybody who was working on the financial side of the room, as opposed to the news and the economy side of the room, was having much more fun than we were. And I would try to work out why that was. One of the strange things, I think that really this has been a very modern trend in how financial journalism has developed. When the Financial Mail started, it was the only specific financial publication of its kind in the country. There were small business sections in the daily newspapers. There was no Business Day. There was only one publication dedicated specifically to finance. Just contrast that with the situation now. We have 6 dedicated business programs on radio in Johannesburg. We have 2, perhaps call it 4 if you want to expand the kind of definition, financial publications, magazine publications. We have really 2, you could say, financial newspapers, or at least the business section of the daily newspapers is massively expanded. Really, we've seen an explosion of financial journalism over the last 2 decades. And the reason for that, I think, is essentially because the stock market is increasingly becoming a subject matter for ordinary people. In all their different manifestations in different ways, the stock market is now becoming, or markets in general, are affecting people's lives much more directly. They're participating in them more enthusiastically, and there are around about 5,000 different unit trusts in South Africa now. There are about 100,000 investors in unit trusts. There are, the whole notion of a sort of ordinary middle class person investing in the stock market 20 years ago was a peculiarity. But but now the retail stock market, the retail element of the stock market, this is ordinary people trading on their own behalf, or at least just buying some stocks that they think have a good future, has really just exploded. I think there's also other reasons for the prominence of financial journalism. I think all the other sectors of our society have become gradually more and more. They've come to the realization that this is a part of their lives that they need to understand better. So trade unions are now following. Trade unions now have economists that are in-house. They are following the company's fortunes much more closely, which is so it isn't just the middle class parts of our society that are taking an interest in financial journalism. It's becoming much more widespread. So how does financial journalism differ? This is a tricky question to answer because there's so much overlap with ordinary journalism. It's quite difficult to set a kind of iron rule that distinguishes the two. I like to think that financial journalism is distinguished by the virtue of the fact that financial journalists understand a little bit of maths. But then when I look at how much maths I actually understand, I'm not so sure about that. And when I look at how much maths my colleagues understand, I'm very unsure about that. But at least we have this aura of having a kind of mathematical understanding, which gives us a kind of bit of an elevation. People think that we're smart because we can add and subtract, which is. But there is that aspect to it. There's a kind of concreteness when you're dealing with. There's a data aspect of financial journalism, which is much more developed than I think ordinary journalism is. Not as a global rule, but you just bump up against it more. You start feeling back for those. How you calculate a recurring increase, percentage increase. From your school maths. I think that the real thing about financial journalism is that it takes you into the world of money. And there's really nothing more powerful. There's nothing, you get to feel people's real passions when you start focusing on money. You get to see really the darkest sides of humans and sometimes the best sides of humans. And it's a rather strange thing because financial journalism is often portrayed in this rather, that it's a sort of straight-laced sort of notion that you have. It's a very kind of sort of organized, methodical, systematic presentation. But underneath it all is a torrent of clashing egos and manias, and that's always the most fun thing to tease out. I also have this notion, and I don't know how far I'd like to go with it, but I do think that the responsibility of financial journalism is different from ordinary journalism. So if you're a journalist, your intention is to convey useful information, reveal important information, sort of contribute to rectifying the wrongs in society. All of that applies to financial journalism equally, but in financial journalism you have an added responsibility, and this is and I call it perfecting the markets. That you have a responsibility to try and ensure that illogicality in the markets is removed. Now, that's a bit of an awesome responsibility, and in the recent past, I have to say, financial journalists have been generally terrible, worse than terrible, at doing this. And I have my own suspicions about why that is, but so you could say In 2008, it was the tiny minority of financial journalists who were warning about that the property market was globally the property market was into bubble territory. It isn't necessarily the responsibility of financial journalism first and foremost, but at least we should have been more there, and we weren't. Partly, one of the biggest weaknesses of financial journalism is that we tend to get enthusiastic about financial markets when we shouldn't, and get unenthusiastic about them when we should. So in other words, when in 2008, I remember, the JSE had just hit 40,000. And everything was flying. It looked as though we were, people were talking about a new commodities regime. In other words, that commodity prices would never go down from where they were. And we wrote this very happily. Occasionally there was a sort of critical comment or two, but generally speaking, if you asked, the average investor or the average financial journalist, do you believe that commodity prices will go down from that point in 2008? Most would say, most experts say they won't. Well, of course they did. And so we get, and that's what I mean about this additional responsibility of trying to have a micro understandanding, but also having a macro understanding, and to know what it feels like when financial markets are overvalued and undervalued, and that's a much more awesome responsibility than I think journalists writing about politics have. I mean, about politics you have opinions. About finances you ought to at least have a data set that you can refer to. I have to say that the other really kind of differentiating factor about financial journalism is that it really is global. We're now into a different world as far as finances are concerned. If you're writing about politics, you're writing about something that is essentially local with a little bit of regional and global aspects to it. But generally, the world of finance has gone way past that now. We are what happens in Bangkok and affects us. You can see it. It's really extraordinary to see how little local market watchers really care about what happens in South Africa, and how much they care about what happens in New York. It's amazing to see how all of these stock markets, bond markets are moving now in tandem around the world, and really that's a completely new thing too. It's also the other. The whole canvas of financial journalism is now much wider, and it's you can also see it in the nature of companies. When I started in journalism, there was no South African company that had the majority of its assets outside of South Africa that we reported on. There was, now the top 20 companies on the stock exchange have the majority of their assets outside of South Africa. Essentially, by reporting on them, you're reporting about what happens internationally. And so understanding all of those, what's happening globally is part of the responsibility of financial journalists. And that's too much fun. I mean, I always think that's one of the most fascinating and educative aspects of financial journalism is this. maybe I should just say something a little bit about where I think that we're weak. I do think that the basic parts of the basic tools of understanding companies in South Africa are still too low. We don't have a kind of history of understanding accounting in a casual way, as much as we should. We don't get exposure to it, I think, until until you really need it. I still feel that as a lack myself. I just don't. I'm not sure. The level of sort of general expertise about the nature of a balance sheet isn't there in South Africa. I do wish, that along with basic literacy courses, we should have basic financial understanding courses in South Africa. I think it would help anyway with people dealing with personal finances. Yeah, that's all I can think of. I've been babbling.